US President Joe Biden plans to go after tax cuts put in place by his predecessor Donald Trump. Polls suggest a majority of Americans believe they already pay too much.
President Biden says wealthy people and corporations need to pay their fair share of taxes, but he's pitching these hikes to a tax-weary electorate. Almost two-thirds of voters, 64%, say their taxes are too high. That is the most since our pollsters started asking this question way back in 2004. Only 2% polled say their taxes are too low. They want to pay more. While most voters want lower taxes, about half at the same time say they want the government to lend them a hand versus leave them alone. That number ticked up during the pandemic and has stayed higher compared to pre-COVID. On the campaign trail, President Biden is going after former President Trump's tax cuts. Biden is making the case if he gets the tax increases he wants, his administration will be able to help more Americans. But former President Trump is defending his record.
If Biden is reelected, he's promising to impose a $6 trillion tax hike, which will turn literally the U.S. economy, will destroy the U.S. economy. I never heard of a guy campaigning where he wants to raise taxes.
He talks about the debt. He exploded it more than any other president in a four-year term. With his $2 trillion tax cut that overwhelmingly benefited the very wealthy and the biggest corporations in America.
And the same Fox News poll finds about 3/4 of voters say the economy is in only fair or poor shape. That could spell trouble for President Biden in November.
Let's head to the United States now. Joining me live is Dr. Patrick Schoettmer, Seattle University Professor of American Politics. The word tax cuts, I'm not giving tax cuts, or I'm giving tax cuts. They're dangerous words to be using on the election campaign.
That's right, Tim. They can be a kind of a risky move to make during an election year. Now, it's certainly the case that if you ask Americans if they think millionaires pay enough in taxes, most will say no. And there's fairly wide support for raising taxes of people they see as being wealthy, but no one really supports raising their own taxes. And so trying to nuance or finesse a message where you're going to tax the people who Americans want to see taxed more, but not impose taxes upon the middle class can be a hard line to walk at times.
All righty. Now, what about this political race? Here we are in early April. How do you see it at the moment, Patrick?
Well, I think right now, a lot of voters are really coming to grips with the fact that it is, in fact, going to be a Trump-Biden rematch. Just a month or so ago, 71% of voters were telling us in polls that they did not think it would wind up being a Trump-Biden rematch. And I think a lot of voters are still kind of wish casting a bit, hoping that someone else will emerge as a third-party candidate, which is why we see relatively high levels of support for Robert Kennedy Jr. right now in some of the trials. But likely as we get closer to the election, voters will resign themselves to the option that they face and return home to either the Democratic or the Republican Party. But right now, I think Americans are still grieving a little bit about the choice they have in front of them.
It's very tight, isn't it? If you look at the polls, polls aren't always the best indicators, but the best we've got.
Right. Right now, polls aren't going to be super reliable, but they're going to get more reliable as we get closer. We're seeing a lot of undecided voters right now. And ever since, for the last decade or two, presidential elections have always been tight and come down to a few key states in the Electoral College. So I don't see any reason why this election will be any different.
More dramas for Donald Trump during the week in courtrooms, and it's really becoming crystal clear that he has a battle winning a lot of women over in the United States.
Yeah, we've seen for the past decade or two that women, especially white women, have been trending towards the Democratic Party, and white men have been trending more towards the Republican Party. So the parties have themselves taken on a somewhat gendered aspects to their politics that they approach and the kind of arguments they make to the general public. And women in particular seem really uncomfortable both with the way President Trump presents himself, but also the knockoff effects of the Dobbs case where abortion was abortion became a state's issue rather than having federal protections. And for women, particularly women in areas where abortion rights have been restricted, we see Democrats considerably outperforming their pre-electoral expectations. And we've seen that consistently over the past 2 years.